Hey, it's me. I'm outside his house. Remind me, you said this guy missed 2 of your power-up prompt stories? Huh. Unforgivable. It's always the ones you least expect. Don't worry, I'll get it done.
Man, I can't believe how good that book was. I know. I liked all the action.
We liked the assassins also. Yeah, Jason was so cool.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, A.M. Schilling did an amazing job with this debut novel. I cannot believe this is the first one she's ever published. Whoa, hey, what was that? I'm sure it's nothing. Probably another assassin sent to kill you for missing a power-up prompt story submission. That's oddly specific, Finton. Well, I mean, it has happened before. Yeah, I guess you're right.
Alright, nobody move. I'm just here for the writer.
Hey, whoa, what's this all about?
You missed L.G. Wells's power-up prompt story last week. That's the second time it's happened. I've got my orders. I'm supposed to take you out.
Okay, well, that's fair. I did forget to include his story last week. But hey, maybe we can talk about this.
Listen, unless you're doubling the pay, I don't want to hear it.
Okay, well, what if I told you that my guest on this week's podcast was author A.M. Schilling?
The A.M. Schilling? As in author of The Devouring?
Yeah, the very same. I'm guessing you're a fan of the book?
Are you kidding? Jason is my hero. He's like John Wick, but even cooler.
I agree. He and Ayana's characters in the book are just amazing.
Mr. Assassin, if you kill Bradley, he won't be able to release this week's podcast episode.
And that's to say nothing of his Devine stories. I mean, I'm sure I could find someone else to write them. In fact, a few writers do come to mind.
Finton, you're not helping.
We wants to hear the interviews. You can deal with the writer after the podcast.
Alright, you've got yourself a deal. I want to hear this interview. Hey, what's your show called anyhow?
I'm so glad you asked. Welcome, everyone, to the Saved as Draft podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 66 of the Saved as Draft podcast. This week's episode is packed to the brim with all kinds of amazing stories, writing discussion, and of course, our featured guest interview. This week, I'm very excited to share my conversation with A.M. Schilling, an author I first met over on Blue Sky. I had the honor of being an ARC reader on her debut novel, The Devouring, and folks, I loved that book. It was pitched to me as John Wick meets H.P. Lovecraft, and let me tell you, it delivered on both fronts. I actually posted a full review over on The Writer's Journey that I'll link to in the show notes. But suffice to say, I highly recommend it. So, this week I sat down with her to talk about the process of crafting this book, the inspiration behind it, and what's next, now that it has been officially launched. It's a fantastic interview, so look forward to that later in the episode. Before that, we'll take a look at our weekly shoutouts, our Wandering Prompt winner, our Power-Up Prompt stories, and our weekly writing discussion. Before we dive in, though, let's take a look at the Community Spotlight. This week's Spotlight is on author L.G. Wells. Now, you're probably wondering why I'd spotlight the author who hired a fictional assassin to come after me in the intro. Well, the answer to that is quite simple. He was totally justified in doing that. And also, for legal reasons, this entire scenario is a joke. I've only missed a handful of power-up prompt stories since I started doing them, and I've somehow missed one of his twice now. Suffice to say, I'll have a new submission form system after May's challenge that will ensure that this doesn't happen in the future. In the meantime, I have to share why I love this horror author. So, LG and I met early on when I joined Substack, and he was my guest on the show here a while back when I first started doing interviews. We also worked together at Audio Mazes, so I've had the privilege of working alongside him and getting to know him and his work through that as well. His style of horror is insanely atmospheric and rich with nice details. Not only that, but he's a lover of cosmic horror like me. And if you check out his most recent post, you'll learn about his dream to become a scare actor at Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights. It's a really good post, And as someone who went to that event every year that I lived in Florida, I think, honestly, L.G. Wells would be a fantastic scare actor. So, check out what he's got going on, and stay tuned for a few of his stories later in the episode that you can check out as well. Really appreciate you being here, my friend, and thank you as always for understanding when I slip up. It's obviously never intentional. I'm just painfully human sometimes. All right, that's housekeeping sorted. Let's check out this week's shoutouts right after a quick word from our sponsor. Today's episode of the Saved as Draft podcast is sponsored by Character Hits LLC, the only service you can hire to deal with fictional characters.
Hi there, my name is Agent Marks, and I'm a professional killer. You may recognize me from such productions as the introduction to this very podcast episode. I'm here today because I've recently discovered that professional killings are in fact illegal. Who'd have thought? Anyway, I'm out of work now, so I've decided to start a new business called Character Hits LLC. I'm told you writer types don't like killing off your characters, so for a small fee, I'll do it for you. I'll even provide a written report so you can properly use it to off them in your book. And trust me when I say that confidentiality is our number one priority. No one will know you didn't have the heart to do it yourself. So, next time a character's time is up, give me a call. Need to kill off a character but can't muster up the courage to do it yourself? Call Character Hits LLC today to schedule a free consultation. All right, and we're back. Each week I open a thread in my subscriber chat where you can share links to your latest work. I shared these links with Mina Howell and her Penny Dreadfuls podcast, and together we pick several to talk about on our respective shows. So for me, that's 5 links selected at random. So let's dive in and see what we got this week. First up for this week's shoutouts is Mermaid in the Bathtub by Tina Crossgrove. As the title suggests, this is a story about a mermaid trapped in someone's bathtub, and Tina does a lot of cool stuff with this premise. There's a nice combination of intrigue and mystery here, along with some really great humor and personality in the characters and their dialogue. It begins with our protagonist finding a note from their roommate telling them not to look in the bathroom, so naturally they do so. And boom, within those first few lines, we're introduced to our mermaid. One thing I loved here is how Tina took the concept of a mermaid in a unique direction. Not only is the design and imagery surrounding how the mermaid looks really cool, but the way that the mermaid has a sort of telepathic connection with the protagonist is a really interesting concept that she explores here. It's the kind of story that hits you with several really interesting things right off the bat that grab your attention and hold it. From there, you'll stay for the sharp dialogue and pacing. It's a great story. Let's check out an excerpt. I suddenly felt insatiably hungry, like I had not eaten for days. The thing in the bathtub flapped its tail in the water, and the feeling intensified. Is that you? Are you in my damn head? Hunger pulsed through me. Are you hungry? She flapped her tail again, sarcastically it seemed, as if to say, no shit, Sherlock. What does a mermaid, I asked before finishing, eat? Impatient flop of the tail this time, then she looked at me. Friend, not food, I said firmly. She licked her very pointy teeth and clenched and unclenched her webbed hands as she reached toward me. Great stuff. Be sure to check out the link in the show notes to read the full story. It's a great one. Our second shout out this week is Excess, the Useless Thing That Made Us Human by the Biological Imagination. So this piece is a sort of poem or kind of spoken word type of format that illustrates a conversation between Krishna and biology. It's a kind of reflective piece in that way that explores the concept of art as a fundamental human need, despite it not being a biological one. The result is a truly beautiful and profound piece of writing. I loved how the participants in the conversation here felt like that they were having a real dialogue by the end, where one was starting to understand the other. It's really impressive stuff. Let's check out an excerpt. Biology. The excess is what I cannot locate in the original design brief. The fact that the brain can generate not just function, but beauty. Not just information, but meaning. Not just communication, but the specific experience of being moved by something made by another mind. Krishna. It was always in the design brief. Biology. Where? Show me. Krishna. I gave them hands that couldn't hold more than tools. I gave them pattern recognition that exceeded survival, emotion with no ceiling, and the knowledge that they would end. What did you think they would do with all of that? Oh, I love that last part. Literally just gave me chills. Great work from this author. This is my first time reading their stuff. I'm really impressed. Check the show notes for a link. Our third shout out this week is Night Watch by J.R. Phillips. And it has been way too long since I've talked about this author's work on the show. Very excited to discuss this one. With this piece, we start off with a really strong opener discussing an ongoing investigation into a ritualistic murder. Now that is what I call a hook. Our protagonist is Sylvie, and I really love this character. J.R. Phillips has this knack for creating characters that feel like they have depth and nuance, and that's absolutely the case here. We learn more about Sylvie's life and how she found her way into the neighborhood she currently lives in. We also learn about the neighborhood itself, about the atmosphere, the way people carry themselves, and how all this clashes with Sylvie and made it difficult for her to feel like she fits in. Piece by piece, the author builds a believable world in this story, and at the same time, fills it with people who you'll relate to and care about. It's not easy to build a world that feels like it's already been lived in, but J.R. Phillips absolutely did that here, and it's really impressive stuff. Let's check out an excerpt. The final expectation of being a part of the neighborhood was to have a hobby. Nothing too quirky. People need to understand it. Simple things worked best, like gardening or book clubs. Sylvie had tried gardening, but she killed every plant she touched. Like the roots could tell, death was always leering over her. A few months back, she had decided to rid herself of all the evidence and hauled 3 bags of failed green thumb attempts to the curb. Suzanne, her closest neighbor to the right, had been horrified. It was the first time Sylvie had laughed since Rudy's death. Suzanne, a woman in her 60s, recently retired, was now obsessed with the neighborhood's choices of lawn and garden maintenance. Armed with her little notebook, she would take a daily walk, scribbling her grievances. The roasting would commence each month at the HOA meeting. Suzanne had somehow weaseled her way into a time slot designated for humiliation. Sylvie hadn't made the list yet, and had a sneaking suspicion that Suzanne deemed her a lost cause. Most people ignored Sylvie, probably because she snubbed every block party invite and mixer. It was better that they kept their distance anyway. Rudy always told her too many friends meant too many lies, and lies never stayed buried for long. Fantastic. Love it. Check the show notes for a link. Our fourth shout out this week is Cocooned in Wonder by Sarah Tinney. This flash fiction piece reminds me once again why Sarah is one of the best flash fiction writers in the game. The prompt here was to write a story about a character waking up to an alarm. Pretty simple. But with this piece, we see them woken up by the alarm only to realize it's Saturday. And this happens to me every week. So that moment of relief when you realize that you don't have to work, or at least in my case, I don't have to work on professional writing, more creative stuff, is a special moment. The imagery here is also incredible. I love the description of the sky's color as the morning passes, and the last few lines are beautifully poetic as well. It's just a really nice piece of fiction. And honestly, this is closer to microfiction than it is to flash fiction, so I'm just going to read the whole thing. Let's check it out. The alarm startled him awake. Groaning, he reached to turn it off, then remembered. It's Saturday. He was about to fall asleep again when he paused. When was the last time he watched the sunrise? He cocooned himself in his doona and stepped outside. Slowly the sky turned from blue-black to pale blue, the yellow tinge transforming to melted butter yellow as the sun gloriously arrived, its warmth chasing the chill from the air. A quiet, magical performance. Most days it went unnoticed, but not today. He stood still, breathing it all in, humbled by the beauty of the natural world. Amazing. A perfect little slice of life story and a reminder to stop and enjoy the little things. Fantastic work. Our final shout out this week is Ava by Mary Ellen Brady, and the title here is an acronym for Adaptive Virtual Assistant, by the way. So Mary Ellen put that in the subtitle of the piece, and this one is based on a visual prompt from Tina Crossgrove, which is super cool. This story is about a robotic assistant who finds themselves without a task after humanity has mysteriously disappeared. It's a quiet and reflective piece. As always, Mary Ellen sets up the world and the setting beautifully. There's this combination of warmth and heartbreak in those opening lines that really pulled me in from the get-go. As the story goes on, Ava finds purpose in learning about humanity through the things they left behind. She starts to notice things in nature, animals, birds, insects, and so on. By the end, this robotic assistant finds new purpose, and she's become quite human as well in the process. It's a beautiful story. Let's check out an excerpt. The rain came on day 1701.
It rained for 3 days without stopping. Ava was not supposed to stand in rain. Her manual said this in firm and careful language. She stood in it anyway, and discovered something she couldn't label. The rain made a sound on her metal shoulders. It was almost music. She held very still. She wanted to hear all of it. When the clouds passed, the field behind the old primary school turned gold with buttercups. Ava walked through them. She did it again the following morning, and the morning after that. Summer came, then the red turn of autumn, then snow so quiet. Then the first green shoots pushing through the cold, insistent as a question. The world kept moving forward, without the humans. Ava found a notebook on day 2844. It was in a classroom, a small desk near the window, a child's handwriting on the cover in purple marker. My nature journal. Priya, age 7. Inside, drawings of ladybugs and clouds, a pressed maple leaf, brown now, but still holding its shape. A list of questions. Why do worms come out when it rains? Do birds dream? What is the biggest thing that has ever lived? Ava sat on the floor. She was too large for the desk. She could answer 2 of the questions. She took the notebook with her. She held it in the way her memory said people held things that mattered. Priya, somehow, now mattered. Wow, 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 wow. Chills once again. Amazing stuff. And once more, really nice shout-outs this week. So thank you to everyone who submitted links. And remember, you can submit your own work every Tuesday in my subscriber chat. Beautiful stuff. Next up, let's take a look at this week's Wandering Prompt winner. Welcome, one and all, to this week's Wandering Prompt Award ceremony. Last week's prompt was a doozy. Write a story or poem about a character who finds themselves trapped in the wrong body. Huh, I feel like that every day. Oh yeah? Why's that? I definitely remember myself looking younger for starters. I'm starting to think the mirror is lying to me. All right, you two, get out of here. Oh man, you would think that their jobs as commentators would mean they would know how to stay focused, but that's clearly not the case. Anyway, our winner this week is Blade Mistress Gale, formerly known as Pam, by Verdant Butterfly. This story brings Butterfly's iconic comedy to the forefront. When she wants to make you laugh, by God, you'll be in stitches by the end before you know it. She knows how to use comedic timing and witty dialogue that really makes every joke land. In this story, our character finds themselves in the body of a legendary fighter, which is really something when you also discover their past life was nearly the exact opposite. As you can imagine, Verdant Butterfly leans into this fish out of water concept and uses that to reveal more about the world as well. For example, there's a fun exchange where she reveals that she's in the wrong body and the person she's talking to isn't fazed by that. They go on to explain that even stranger things have happened recently, and just like that, we got a funny joke and some great world building all at once. The way the story tees things up for more adventures by the end is also excellent. I love the premise, I love the unique world, and I would read an entire series about Blade Mistress Gale for sure. So, given that this is our Wandering Prompt winner this week, let's check out an extended excerpt. She lifted her hands, paused, stared. These are not my hands. Still feminine, but bigger, scarred. The kind of hands that had done things, important things, possibly illegal things, definitely calloused things. She flexed her fingers. Oh no. Her voice dropped out of her throat like it had somewhere better to be, a little huskier than she expected. Oh no. I sound like I give orders now. She coughed, tried again. Hello? Still commanding, still dangerous. Still very much not Pamela. She took a step forward. The ground crunched under heavy boots. Boots she did not remember putting on, and a posture that felt like it came with expectations. I asked for a new life, she said, glancing around the open hills and distant village. This feels like a management position. The memory came back in flashes. A well, a coin, a vague, poorly worded wish about wanting something different, something bigger. Something where she stopped feeling like a background character in her own life. She looked down at herself again. Okay, she said slowly. So the universe heard different and said, excellent, here's a full career change. A voice called out behind her. You're late. She turned. A guy stood there, arms crossed, sword at his side, giving her the kind of look usually reserved for people who had absolutely done this before. Late for what? She asked. He blinked. The escort job. Dawn meeting? You said, and I quote, I'll be there, don't worry, I'm extremely reliable. She winced. That does sound like something I would say in a moment of reckless optimism. He stared at her. Are you all right, Gail? She froze. Gail? He frowned. Yes. Your name? Pamela took a slow breath. Right. Of course it is. Amazing work from Vernon Butterfly this week. That story is so much fun. I could read the whole thing, so I highly recommend it. You'll find a link in the show notes, and stay tuned for this week's Wandering Prompt as well, hidden somewhere in the episode. For now, though, we'll take a look at the Power Up Prompt stories right after a quick mindful moment. Hey there. This is Chill Bradley, here with this week's mindful moment. I've actually got 2 quotes for you this week. Here's the first. Growth is painful. Change is painful. But nothing is as painful as staying stuck somewhere you don't belong. Mandy Hale. I myself am someone who doesn't like change because it's unpredictable. My whole life has been unpredictable. I knew I wanted to be a writer from a young age, but career-wise, I didn't get into writing until I was well out of college. And even then, I was a freelance writer for over 5 years. Ain't nothing stable about that. In fact, at one point, I didn't find work for months. Thankfully, these days I have a steady job in marketing as a content manager, but even that's feeling less and less stable as time goes on. I work in tech, so everyone around me's all aboard the AI train, and me? Well, I'm not. And that's scary, because now I wonder if AI is going to replace me. It's faster, and it doesn't complain about things like bandwidth or burnout. And beyond my career, the world at large doesn't feel stable or safe either. As many of you might know, I was the victim of gun violence when I was younger, and that trauma has made me terrified to even exist in our modern world. And if you're unaware, I live in the US, so you can probably imagine why I feel that way. And beyond all of that, I just feel stuck. Like I can't change anything. Like I'm not empowered to change anything. Like I don't deserve to change anything. I left the place where I grew up because trauma made it unbearable to live there, and now the place I live has been corrupted by its own trauma that happened over the last 3 years. And so, I want out. I want a fresh start. I know there's a whole world out there, but I'm stuck here in a house that I own in debt that I didn't ask for. It just feels like the chips have been stacked against me, now more than ever. And it's got me feeling like I can't change things. Or if I can, then I have to compromise. And that brings me to our second quote. If you limit your choice only to what seems possible or reasonable, you disconnect yourself from what you truly want, and all that's left is a compromise. Robert Fritz, The Path of Least Resistance. Now, what I like about this quote is that it reframes the situation. I have been limiting my options based on what I think is realistic. I am guilty of that. But wait a second, aren't compromises a good thing? It's how we handle complex and nuanced situations. Isn't it? Well, yes and no. Compromise is important, but only to a point. If you let it go too far, then you'll find yourself making yourself small for the sake of avoiding pain or strife. Ask me how I know. So, what happens if we take off the shackles of reality and really think about what we want, complications and concerns aside? Just really take a minute to imagine the ideal scenario. That's what I want you to do for this week's Mindful Moment. I want you to think about what you really want when all those uncertainties are removed. Oh, and I've got one more gift for you this week. Wandering Prompt, Episode 66. Write a story or poem about a character reflecting on the last time they were truly happy. 1,000 words or less. First to post a link in the comments wins. Good luck. And that's it for this week's Mindful Moment. Thanks for listening. Back to the show. All right, and we're back. This week's power-up prompt was a mixture of sci-fi and romance. Your setting was the Forbidden Vault, your character was the software engineer, and your conflict was misplaced trust. Before we get into that, though, I owe my friend and fellow horror author L.G. Wells an apology. I missed his story last week, so I'm going to cover that one first. And I'm also happy to announce that come June, I will have a new submission method after the May challenge where you can submit power-up prompt stories going forward in a way that they won't get lost in the cracks. It should remove the possibility for errors on my end, but you know me, I might find a way. In any case, these will be shorter shoutouts as always, focused on what makes each story stand out to me. And of course, this allows me to discuss every entry each week, including the ones missed from last week. So, in this case, let's start off with LG's story from last week called The Cleanest Restrooms in Hell. It's a damn shame that I missed this one because it took all the images from that image-based power-up prompt and really ran with them. I love the way that LG molded together concepts of bureaucracy and cold calculations alongside mentions of other real-world authors and some fun nods to their work as well. For example, one portion mentions how Lovecraft was on the right track about the truth of the universe in terms of the scale of the inevitable, but his obsession with the deep was off base. I really love meta-commentary like that. And honestly, much like Bucky's Beaver Nuggets themselves, this story had the perfect mix of savory, sweet, and just enough crunch to remind you that this is still a horror writer that we're talking about. Really fun stuff. And given that this is the second time I've missed LG's story since starting the power-up prompts, it's only fitting that I talk about his story for this week's prompt next. So, this week, LG wrote a story called Echoes of Dathomir, which he describes as Star Wars fanfiction. Color me intrigued. And LG offers up a really nice introduction here too. So here's what he had to say about this story. He says, "This is Star Wars reimagined as a cautionary tale of obsession and ancient dread. It's a glimpse into what happens when the cold, sterile logic of the Empire collides with the blood magic of Dathomir. If L.G. Wells were to chronicle the forgotten tragedies of the Outer Rim, this is the story that would be found buried in the ice. Welcome to Carfid 4. Expect less hope and more haunting." Oh, yeah, that got me hyped. And as I dive into the story, I gotta say right off the bat, LG weaves the prompt elements from this week into the Star Wars universe really well. It's subtle, but he gets a lot of that foundation laid in the first few paragraphs, which is great. And I gotta say, the story is split into multiple parts, and part 2 is called The Sepulchre of Sins. And listen, any author who uses the word sepulchre is immediately going to be my friend. I don't make the rules. And of course, LG and I have been friends for a while, and this is why. But yes, those who are wondering, LG does bring forth that sci-fi and romance element here while keeping his promise at the beginning for a darker Star Wars tale. It's a really beautiful combination. And honestly, I want to see Star Wars get into horror more after reading this. I would immediately buy a ticket to see this in the theater if it became a film. So, why don't you support LG as well and the potential of a future horror Star Wars universe or extended universe by checking out the story at the link in the show notes. And thank you again to LG for these amazing power-up prompt stories. All right, speaking of horror authors, next up this week for the power-up prompt is A Body Made of Wanting by Connor Mancuso. So in the introduction here, Connor promises body horror, and you know I'm hyped to dive in. Interestingly, this story right off the bat is not structured like Connor's normal epic poetry style. It feels poetic for sure in the word choice, but the prose is structured into paragraphs instead of stanzas. It's always nice to see him mix things up though like this. I love how Connor used cuts here with dividers to help us leap from one scene to the next. It creates a nice, controlled pace for the story that I've seen elsewhere with people's work, and I really like that. It removes all the fluff and leaves only the meat. And speaking of meat, the body horror here really kicks in quick in the second half of the story. I love the description of the artificial body's skin. There's a line that reads, "It was the skin of something that had never waited for anything." Connor leans into the uncanny here as well, and it really works. The artificial body uses a character named Dren's voice, and it's terrifying in the way that it looks okay at first, but it feels off. And in this case, the devil is in the details. You get lines about things like 6 fingers and joints that are pivoting the wrong way, and that's just the start. The ending is also abrupt and shocking as well. It's a phenomenal story from beginning to end. Really love this one. Check the show notes for a link. Our next story for this week's power-up prompt is Bruises by J.M. Gooding. And that title really fits because J.M. bruised the heck out of my heart with this one. I still think about some of the first stories that I read from him when we first met, and in those moments, I realized that I was reading an author who could channel emotion and connection in ways that I'd very rarely seen, even in my own work. And that's the case of this story here. Michael and Cassie share a connection that is both beautiful and heartbreaking. Cassie is suffering from an incurable disease, and Michael cares for her, pushing her around in a wheelchair right from the beginning of the story. And the way that he attends to her throughout the story, it provides these actions that show the reader how much he cares for her. His attention to detail, the cadence of how often he checks in, it all serves to further this element of his character. And doing this, he does this knowing that hope is nowhere to be found. It creates a sense of pain and dread that just grows with every passing line. And I'm actually tearing up recording this. It's not the first time JM has done this to me, but he manages to make it hurt like the first time every time. Seriously, though, this is a beautiful story. It's tragic for sure, but beautiful nonetheless. It's stunning work, and my hat's off to my friend here. This is one of my favorite Power Prompt stories that I've read in a while. This is amazing stuff. Next up this week is The Ghost Weight by Abhishek Banerjee. It's been a while since we've seen this author in the Power Up prompts, so I'm really excited to talk about this one. With this piece, Abhishek really brings forward the world building and character interactions in meaningful ways. I love the imagery on display here, and the way the two characters kind of go back and forth in their dialogue is also beautifully done. The interactions, too, feel real and meaningful. And as a side note, I love the concept here of a soul map. And I love how we're told that it's 11 zettabytes in size. This idea that you can quantify the size of a soul is so cool to me. And it's a great example of the world building on display here. And I gotta shout out the images in this story too. Abhishek used images from Unsplash, which is my favorite resource, and the selections here really add to the immersion of the piece. I really love it to see when an author is intentional with their photos like that. It really helps. Great stuff, and glad to see Abhishek back this week. Next up this week is Sight Leith by Mary Ellen Brady. Now, of course, I'll talk about the story here in a second, but I just want to talk about those little CD icons that she uses as dividers here. I just love that detail. Okay, all right, serious face. This story from Mary Ellen is yet another work that beautifully blends science fiction with real, authentic characters and rich world building. The structure here is a standout. I love how Mary Ellen builds anticipation for the climax of the story by layering in these different inputs and perspectives and knowledge as you're reading, and it tells you why they're doing this and where they're heading, and you're just kind of building that suspense as the story goes on. And it all does build to a triumphant ending. The final line had me fist pumping like I just won the Super Bowl. Mary Ellen knows how to get you invested in a story, and this one's another winner from her, so be sure to check it out at the link in the show notes. And our final Power Up prompt story this week is The Shadow Mirror by Mike McClure, aka Every Root, Every Thorn. So with this story, Mike has combined 3 prompts into one. The Power Up prompt is here, the Indie Ink Fund's weekly prompt is present as well, and the third prompt is an image from Labyrinthia Mythweaver. It's a testament to Mike's writing capabilities that I didn't actually see the lines between all these prompts in the story until I looked more closely, because he does blend them together quite well. The transition from one to the next is smooth, and I loved how it moved from the library setting of the Portal prompt to the setting of my own Power Up prompt this week. That was nice. Also, I have to shout out the formatting here. I know it's a small thing, but Mike's usage of space and the way he breaks up his lines really makes this story easy and enjoyable to read. And as someone who works from home, I spend a lot of time on screens, and I get really fatigued reading a lot of things on a screen when there's these big blocks of text. So it really does mean the world when authors take the time to format in a way that helps the eye read comfortably. And so Mike did that here, and I have to give him a shout out for it. All right. Fantastic way to close out the Power Up prompts this week. We'll have another one this Saturday, and then these will be on pause during May's upcoming challenge. So next up, we'll dive into this week's writing discussion. All right, and this week's writing discussion, the topic was how you blend genres, or if you do it all. And the reason I brought that up, of course, is our guest this week on the show, A.M. Schilling, blends genres in her work in really cool ways, especially with her debut novel, The Devouring. So yeah, I wanted to ask all of you how you approach stuff like this in your work. So let's dive in and see what you had to say. First up, Allie Hart says, I do blend them, and I hadn't given it a lot of thought outside the fact that I love the stories. It's romance at its core, but it's also medieval, set in a made-up kingdom where no mention of any real place. There is suspense, battles, royal court drama, political issues, arranged marriages, and I make it a point to add characters who have trauma of some kind, such as survivor's guilt, to the story so I show their growth and maybe help someone going through it. The issue came up when I started posting draft chapters here on Substack. I called it historical romance, and someone pointed out that it's not historical, it's a made-up place, so call it fantasy. Another said, since there's no magic or other species, it's not fantasy. I was told just call it romance. But as a romance reader, I want a better idea of what the book is about than just romance. Are we talking Hallmark or Get My Battle Axe, They Touch My Girl? I also know I can't cherry pick too much as there are only so many options to choose from at the publisher, and calling it a historical-ish medieval sword and dagger suspense maybe fantasy romance is a bit much. Any thoughts on how I or someone else can narrow down the best way to brand and market blended genres? Wow. Okay. Great question to kick us off here. I love how Ali not only responded to the discussion topic here, but also presented something really interesting in terms of, how do you present stories like this? I think for me, there's always going to be people who nickel and dime genres. Like, for example, I don't think the lack of magic as, no magic or other species, I don't think that makes it not fantasy. I think it could still be fantasy without those things. But again, you're going to have people who always draw those hard lines. So my advice, Ali, and I'm hoping that other people weigh in here as well. My advice is to maybe just pick the top 2, maybe 3 genres that are most prevalent in the story and present that, right? So you don't want to get so deep that you're tagging it with like 10 different things, but I think it's totally fair. I mean, based on what you described, it's totally fair to call it a fantasy romance, right? Like, or medieval fantasy romance, right? Again, I don't think the lack of, things like magic really doesn't make it a fantasy. Yes, those things are found in fantasy, but the lack of them doesn't mean that it's just immediately not fantasy. That's just my opinion, but great way to start us off this week from Ali there. I really like that question. Next up, J. Allen Winchester says, I have a complicated relationship with genres. While I claim to write fantasy, I use it more as an umbrella term. What I write are stories and character journeys that, after I get an idea of the direction of our road trip, I try to figure out what genre fits best. My first story is definitely portal fantasy, but it evolved into epic fantasy with some political dynamics as well the longer I worked on it. The second is a fairy tale adventure, but that exploded into young adult eco-adventure with some cosmic horror elements the farther along it got. The third was just a Greek mythology story, but now, well, I didn't mean to write a dystopian political spiritual epic. That's just the Triad sagas. The revival sagas started with my paranormal vampire dark fantasy blended with historical fiction. The young adult, Greek mythology epic, high school academy, thriller, occult time travel, sword and sorcery story is, well, all of that. My first romance rejected the assignment and became a paranormal dark fantasy occult thriller mystery littered with 80s anime humor. In summary, I don't write to genre. I spend weeks trying to figure out what genre across my worlds, and frankly, I have more fun when I don't have to worry about tropes and genres. Stories feel more vibrant to me without labels, but that's why I can't figure out how to market myself. I made my own bed. Oh man, I love Jaden's responses every week. They're always they're in-depth, they're funny, but they're also like just real. Like this is something that I know others struggle with, myself included. What I like here is how Jaden doesn't go into it trying to lock in the genre from the beginning. He just lets the story flow, and then he attaches genre later based on what ends up coming out. And I think that's the better play. For authors who want to have that freedom, right? Some authors do better with those boundaries, in which case you should kind of decide what genres it's going to be from the get-go. But I'm like Jaden in the sense that I want that freedom, and so I think it makes sense to kind of label it after the fact. And in general, I could do a whole podcast about this, but in general, I think that genres as a concept are becoming outdated. I think we need to think about storytelling in terms of the artist. I think, and I've said this before, I think that people who subscribe to me here on Substack, they all see me differently. There are people who, if you were to ask them what Bradley Ramsey writes, they would say, oh yeah, cosmic horror, synaptic sprawl, that's Bradley. But then you go and ask somebody else, and their answer would be totally different. They would say, oh, well, Bradley's a poet. He just released a poetry collection early this year, which I did. And then you ask somebody else, and they go, well, Bradley, he's a podcaster. That's what he does. He podcasts. And so on and so forth. I mean, another example is Devine, my fantasy sci-fi universe. So again, I think that the way that I market myself and the way that we should market ourselves as writers is to stop thinking about things in terms of hard labels and boundaries like genres. Yes, those things are useful in certain cases, and that is how the industry functions. But that may not be the case in the future. I feel like we're getting more to the point where people will read my work and buy whatever books I publish because Bradley Ramsey wrote them, not because it's a horror story, that although that may get them excited as well. They are still there to read my work. And I feel the same way about Jaden's work. Jaden could write anything. I don't care what genre it is. I'm reading it. And I think there's something to that. So thank you, Jaden, for that awesome input as always. Next up, J.M. Gooding says, I don't really start from genre at all. I start from the thing itself, tone, character, whatever pressure the story is under, and I pull in elements as they're needed. If it leans eerie, it might borrow from horror. If it tightens around stakes and momentum, it might take from thriller. But I'm not sitting down thinking this is a horror story and then building from there. It's like tacos. Of course, it's like tacos. A good crunchy shell holds together, gives you structure, adds texture, it does its job. If it's falling apart in your hands, that's not the concept failing, that's the shell being overcooked. It's gone brittle. Of course it cracks. Strict genre works the same way. When it's handled well, it's a solid carrier of the story. It supports what you're doing, and it gives the reader something familiar to hold on to. But when it gets overworked, when the conventions harden into rules you can't flex, you end up writing around the form instead of through it. That's when it starts to break. So I don't worry about sticking to genre conventions, I just don't overcook them. I use what works, discard what doesn't, and let the story decide how much structure it actually needs. For those who know my taco beef with J.M. Gooding, you'll know that this was simultaneously a beautiful and also a jab at me kind of response. It's all in good fun though. I love J.M. Gooding. I love his responses and I love his work. But yes, taco metaphors aside here, this is a beautiful response, and I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's like I said, genre can be serviced in certain ways where it is valuable to the reader and to the writer, but when you lay down those boundaries too much, you risk kind of destroying the story's spirit. And so I really can't add to what JM said here. I think it's perfect. Honestly, it really is. Taco and all. So yes, fantastic response as always from my friend there. Okay, next up, Hallie Jules says, you know me, I'm the will it blend of fiction. I love that. I don't like to feel boxed in. I know some writers might see that as a limitation, but I have fun with it. Some of it, I think, is that I'm very character-driven as far as my plotting goes. I honestly feel that a lot of readers are open to blended genres when the characters are compelling. That being said, all my stories do tend to have some magical/paranormal/sci-fi element. I find it fascinating to play with how those genres would impact real-world settings and characters. That's good stuff. Hallie's input here is really great. I agree, that blending genre is much more accepted these days. And I think, like Hallie said, it's the characters that really make it work. As long as the characters are compelling and the story is interesting, it's like what I said before. People will come to read, your work, right? And so I think I think Hallie is absolutely on point here with this response. And I do love when she inserts kind of these other genres like paranormal and sci-fi in there. It's great stuff. All right, next up, Sarah Tinney says, I don't think I know enough writing rules to know if I'm breaking them. My short stories tend to vary between those with a twist/punchline to slice of life snippets where not much happens. But I think those styles can apply to a wide range of genres, which is one reason why I find it really hard to define what I do. Yeah, no, and that's the thing. Again, rules are one of those things where it's like they're beneficial to a point, but after a certain point, it's just they're not serving the story. And so honestly, Sarah, I mean, your flash fiction, we read some earlier, it's fantastic. And again, I keep coming back to this, but it's the quality of the writing. It's the story itself. And I think that's what you should be focusing on instead of worrying about genres. Like at some point, yes, for marketing, for, all that good stuff, you should, try to figure out where your story fits in. But I'm in the same camp as like Jaden, for example, where you just need to write the story you want to write. And then, you can kind of attach things to it later. So great response. All right, next up, I've got a response here from Emil Ottoman, and there's some colorful language in here that I'll skip over since I know that podcast listeners vary widely in age. So let me summarize here. Emil says, genres for booksellers so they know where to place it on the shelf. You're a writer. Writing fiction is an art, ideally, I think, on good days. So you're the artist. Are you selling the book yet? Unless you're planning something very tight, if this doesn't hit the conventions of an upmarket romance thriller, I'm never going to sell it, and certain things are demanded by the topography of that sort of narrative, yeah, whatever. Worry about what you need to worry about. Otherwise, shut up and write the damn story. So, obviously, this was all said in good fun. But yeah, no, I mean, it's blunt, but it's good advice, right? Like, again, we're kind of hammering home on this topic a few times here, but it's, yes, there is a market, there is certain things you need to think about, so on and so forth. At the end of the day, we want our books to sell well and so on. But yeah, it's like, just don't worry about that, at least not at the beginning. I think that's my advice. And that's where I keep coming back to, right? So Emil is absolutely on point here. It's just, don't worry about it. It's like, if you want to blend genres. Worry about it later, kind of thing. Like I said, taking out like kind of the top two is really the way to go. All right, let's keep moving. Next up, Michelle Ray says, "Hi, Bradley, long time. Yes, genre is artificial, so I blend away. I try to blend poetry and memoir to create lyric essays that tell a story with images rather than a traditional arc. I'm also interested in experimenting with visual art and lyric prose by adding multimedia collage inspired by Claudia Rankine's Citizen." Okay, cool. And also, hello, Michelle. It has been a while, but this is a great answer here. I love how Michelle says genre is artificial, because it is. We invented it, right? Like, it gives people foundation. It gives them a place to kind of like, anchor themselves, but it's ultimately artificial. And I like that kind of, label for it there. And yeah, also, blending different types of writing, like poetry and memoir, as Michelle says here, that's a great way to make your story stand out as well. Like, again, I'm all about experimentation. So I really like this response here, and I think it's on point. All right, next up, Anton Anderson says, "Depending on my mood, I can remember that genres are a thing, but generally I think about genre only if a prompt/event/contest speaks about them. For example, when I need to write about a carnivore cabbage warrior, I just write whatever comes to mind. But if I need to write steampunk, then I don't write anything at all because I'm too lazy to research the genre and give it justice." Fair enough. "Sometimes I know a genre because I randomly read some stories in it or randomly heard an explanation somewhere, but I never purposefully went out of my way to research a genre." Yeah, again, I think with this response here specifically, it's just a matter of, like, for example, I won't probably ever do historical fiction because I know that it requires a level of research that I just don't have the time for, and even then I probably won't get the details right. So I know that about myself, and I steer clear of that genre as a result, And I think that's okay. Not every writer can write every genre, nor should they. Should writers experiment? Absolutely. Which is why, if you need to kind of put genre aside to get the story down on paper, do it, right? And I agree with Anton there. Next up, Fist Bump the Sky says, "I think it comes down to whether you put your emphasis on the narrative voice or the atmosphere. Every genre has its own set of rules, so by knowing the rules, you can bend them easily enough to blend the genres. Breaking down them completely and jumping from one genre to the next, however, can come across as being a rebel without a cause more than creating a blend. However, narrators don't have to just be the reporters, but a character instead with various opinions that can be revealed, not only through what is shared with the readers, but what is not. So I suppose it's a case of atmosphere changes versus convention breaking versus narrative manipulation." Also, shout out to Fist Bump the Sky. I haven't seen them in the chat here in a while, but they do some super cool stuff with their world and their stories. So please check that out if you haven't. But yeah, Fist Bump the Sky is exactly right here. It's one of those things where, if you want to blend genres, you have to make sure that you're bending the rules and not breaking them. Because if you break the rules and just go completely off the rails, you may have fun, but the reader is going to be confused and disoriented, and it's just not going to end well, right? So I like the advice here, also about balancing that with narrators who aren't just, a detached voice in the story. There's someone who's also a character with their own motivations and opinions, because that will allow them to kind of go with the flow to an extent. And again, it's that combination of elements that really works here. So great stuff from Fist Bump the Sky. Next up, Will says, "I really don't think about genre in the slightest. At the very most, it's simply a byproduct of the writing. I'm not sure I could even really tell you what genre most of my short stories fall into, and to be honest, I don't really care. Even if I'm writing something for a contest that requires a certain genre, I still put it to the back of my mind and just write whatever I want to write about. I can use the synopsis to justify why it fits. I'm a firm believer that thinking too much about such things will only serve to restrict your creativity and create a border that you feel compelled to stay within. If people want to assign my stories to a particular genre, good for them. I don't think it's my job to necessarily do that. I just wrote the damn thing. No, I love it. I love it. Will is absolutely right. And that's kind of, again, like I'm kind of a mixed bag myself. I do take genre into account, but I like here how Will just kind of has a, we'll figure it out later kind of mindset. And I agree with that. I think at the end of the day, and again, we've heard some of this in the other responses, but you don't want to restrict yourself so much that you limit the creativity. That's the key takeaway here. So love that response from Will. And last but not least, Nesby Nicolo says, "This is a good question to ponder. I hate being labeled as one type of writer. I know I will be a hard sell for any agent/publisher. I write in different genres altogether. Never considered the idea of blending the two. I think I've been doing this all along as my stories always involve science fiction or fantasy. My unconventional approach to writing is tell good stories, and it helps not to stay limited to one thing." Yeah, no, of course, absolutely, Nesby. Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And it's interesting how we will, without even realizing it, find ourselves blending genres. But yeah, it's totally fair. And at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, okay, there's some argument to be made about marketability, especially if you're going the traditional publishing route. But at the end of the day, if you write a great story and you polish it to a mere sheen, there is someone out there who can help you sell it, right? Like, I believe that, right? And it might take longer, maybe, than a story that fits better into the mainstream, but at the end of the day, you need to write the story that you want to write. I mean, that's really kind of my last sort of thought here. So, in any case, really packed writing discussion this week. Thank you, everyone, for all of your amazing inputs. I loved some of the takeaways here, and yeah, clearly this was a topic that had a lot of really interesting kind of perspectives from people. So thank you again. And yeah, let's get on to the next part of the show here. So next up is our featured guest interview. I was really excited to have the opportunity to sit down with A.M. Schilling this week, the author of The Devouring. This is an author who recently released her debut novel, and she already is well on her way to the next one. Her imagination is incredible. The way she blends genres is really cool. And if her next book is anything like this first one, you can bet I'll be first in line to buy it. She has earned me as a fan for life. So, without further delay, let's get into this week's interview. All right, everybody. This week on the Saved as Draft podcast, I'm very excited to welcome to the show A.M. Schilling. Thank you for being here, my friend.
Thank you for inviting me.
So let's start off by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your creative journey thus far.
Sure. So I am A.M. Schilling. You can call me Ange in the interview if you like, or in person if we ever meet. I started writing when I was a kid, and it was mostly fan fiction of like TV shows that I really liked. Or books that I enjoyed a lot, like Redwall and Animorphs and stuff like that. So I think as I got older in high school, I took a creative writing class, but for the most part, in my teenage years and into my 20s, I just was satisfied writing fan fiction. I also used to do a lot of like play by post role play on forums, and I currently play a lot of tabletop RPGs. So that's part of the creative journey for me as well. And then I decided I was finally going to write my first book at the end of 2024, and here I am.
Wow, that's amazing. So yeah, I love the shout out for Animorphs, by the way. I was a big fan of that back in the day. That's really cool. Yeah, so do you recall, I know you said you kind of started out writing fan fiction. Do you recall the first story that you ever wrote? And if so, do you remember what it was about?
I must have been 6 or 7 years old, so I don't remember too much anymore. I don't think I had like a concept of plot at that age.
Right.
But it was definitely Sailor Moon fan fiction. I was really into Sailor Moon and Pokemon and that kind of anime as a kid.
That's awesome. Okay, very nice. Yeah. Definitely. I had very similar interests as a kid as well. So yeah, on your website, you mentioned that you're a horror, fantasy, and romance author. So what is it about those genres that kind of drew you to them specifically? And do you ever find yourself blending them, kind of how your latest book, for example, was kind of a blend of multiple genres?
blending them is actually my specialty. That's what I want to do. I don't want to write only horror and silo it, and then only fantasy and silo that, and then only romance. I want to see how those genres can be blended together into very unique and exciting stories. So I think I would say with fantasy, I started off reading a lot of fantasy, especially starting out as a kid, right? Like Animorphs, like we said, though I guess it's mostly sci-fi. But as I got older, I was reading like George R. R. Martin, Brandon Sanderson, N.K. Jemisin, like those kind of authors, right? Really epic fantasy, lots of world building, intricate plots, casts of characters. I kind of got burnt out from the epic fantasy genre, so now I focus a lot more on like supernatural, paranormal, and weird, which overlaps into horror if you think about it.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Now, was the genre blending something that you kind of knew right away when you started writing like kind of more consistently, or was it something that kind of evolved over time? I'm curious, like what led you to that? Because I love that concept of blending genres. Just curious how you got there.
I think I think honestly, I wanted to see like when we look at various media now, whether it's movies or comics or books, video games, there are lots of genres blended in them already, right? Growing up, I kind of always consumed fiction that was blended in genre. Like Star Wars is sort of science fantasy, right? It's not purely fantasy, it's not purely sci-fi. And I loved Star Wars movies when I was a kid and grew up with them. So I think I always was surrounded by those kinds of blended genres. And like I said, supernatural and paranormal fantasy overlaps a lot with horror. So when I was a kid, I started reading H.P. Lovecraft's, like Call of Cthulhu mythos and all of that. So cosmic horror was always one of my favorite genres, and it also blends horror with sci-fi and horror with the like occult fantasy. So it was always something that I guess I read and consumed.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's so interesting that you discovered cosmic horror through H.P. Lovecraft at such a young age. I'm trying to remember when I first read my first Lovecraft story, but yeah, as soon as I kind of like experienced cosmic horror, that was a big moment for me where I was like, okay, I need to write this.
I'm the same way. I really wanted to consume more cosmic horror once I kind of got the first inkling of it through Lovecraft's short stories, but it took me like over a decade to actually start writing my own stories in that genre.
Right. That makes sense. So for my next question here, I wanted to ask, what kind of key themes and takeaways do you hope readers kind of get when when they read your work?
So I like to play a lot with morality in my stories.
Hmm.
I like morally ambiguous characters and situations. I want my readers at the end of the book to think, like, were the protagonists right? Were decisions, the decisions they made, were they the right ones? Would I have made them, right? And I think that when you blend genres together like I do and like other authors do, you can play around a little bit more with that, right? Your earlier question mentioned, my interest in romance as a genre as well. And when you add romance to horror, for example, you get to explore different emotions and situations that we wouldn't normally get to explore, right? In like a pure romance.
Hmm.
So I think that the questions of morality and the decisions the protagonist made are the I want my readers to dwell on.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, you also bring up a really good point about how blending genres kind of creates opportunities, for certain types of stories and in certain types of like scenarios that wouldn't be possible otherwise. I really like that point. That was really interesting. So on your website, you also mentioned that you're an artist, and I was curious, did you do the art for your latest novel, for example?
I did, yes. I drew the cover myself,
Hmm.
and then I also designed the cover, like added all the text and stuff myself.
Wow, that's amazing. I love the cover. What was the inspiration behind it? I'm curious.
Well, it's a Rorschach ink blot.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if readers who saw the cover are, but it's, very famous image in psychology.
Right.
And the psychology of the main male character is an important part of his characterization. And I'll just leave it at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely don't want to give away any spoilers at all. Um, So, yeah, let's talk a bit more about your novel. Obviously, it's titled The Devouring, and people who listen to the show here and follow me on Substack know that I also reviewed it on my Substack publication, The Writer's Journey. So, for anyone that's listening right now, though, that's not familiar with The Devouring, would you mind giving us a quick overview of what the book is and what it's about?
Sure thing. So, The Devouring is a cosmic horror thriller novel about a husband and wife. They are the main characters. He's a professional assassin, and she conducts autopsies for the city's forensic center. When his brother is coldly murdered and she discovers an impossible illness in one of her cadavers, they start investigating these mysterious events, and eventually the paths merge together and they realize there's an occult conspiracy at the heart of their city. So
Hmm.
ultimately, The Devouring is a story about the monsters that we choose.
Mm. Oh, I love that. That's a really nice pitch. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So,
Thank you.
I remember when you and I first met over on Blue Sky, and we were talking about The Devouring back when you asked me to be an arc reader on it. You had pitched it to me as H.P. Lovecraft meets John Wick, and I mean that is just the best like pitch for me specifically. Like those two things are amazing. And so I was curious about obviously you're a fan of cosmic horror, but how did you like arrive at this idea where you combine specifically kind of the thriller elements with the cosmic horror? Because it's such a unique blend that I don't think I've really ever seen. So I'm curious how you got there.
Well, I wanted my first book to be an homage to cosmic horror, first of all, because it is my favorite genre of fiction. And so I kind of wanted to say, hey, this has always inspired me, and so I want to write for the genre as well.
Hmm.
As for the thriller aspect, I knew I wanted to write from a villain's perspective. And I really like, I don't know, maybe this says something about me, but I just really love stories like crime thrillers and like fast-paced action movies.
Hmm.
And so I thought, oh, an assassin would be a really cool main character because, like I said, John Wick, huge inspiration. Love those movies. I love the world building, and it has its own sort of fantastical element of like this sprawling criminal underworld, like assassin organization. And I thought, oh, that's cool. Honestly, a lot of my ideas come from, oh, that's cool. And finding the blend just sort of, it took a lot of brainstorming and ideation, but ultimately a marriage of two things I love a lot.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. That yeah, I enjoyed it for very similar reasons because it was a combination of two things that I also really enjoy. So, that's why I was super excited about it as soon as I heard the premise. And yeah, so next I wanted to talk a bit about the characters in the book, specifically the two main protagonists, the husband and wife. Um, they are just super strong characters, and I mentioned this in my review, but I loved how you captured the nuance of their relationship. Not only the difference in their careers, obviously, but how they kind of work together and sort of like, this relationship that they've formed, kind of knowing each other's secrets. So yeah, I'd love to know more kind of, how those characters came together. And I'm curious if any aspects of them are inspired by real life at all.
No one in real life. I don't know any real life assassins
Fair.
or anyone who does autopsies. Um, Nor do I know anyone of their particular psychological makeup,
Fair.
fortunately. But I knew I wanted to write something different than what we normally read in fiction, especially horror fiction, because
Hmm.
I don't know about you, but a lot of movies and books usually have a husband and wife character like pair, and there's some like deep interpersonal relationship
Hmm.
issue, right?
Hmm.
Like marital like problems and stuff like that. And I did not want that.
Hmm.
I also wanted older protagonists because both of them are in their friends, who are already in like a committed relationship, where they work together to overcome obstacles. And so, that's sort of related to what I just said too about like no like interpersonal issues. And so that meant that they had to be accomplices from the very start, right? Like one couldn't keep the other in the dark. necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
And then their dynamic, number two, had to be a certain way so that the cooperation over the course of the story worked, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so automatically that cuts out a lot of other dynamics, right? And honestly, I think when you read the story and you read their relationship and how they interact, it's sort of like a breath of fresh air.
Mm.
You know, it's something that you don't normally read about in other books. So, and as for their careers, you asked about that as well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I knew Jason had to be an assassin, like, for because that's what I wanted to write, right now.
Mm.
But as for Ayana being like a forensic pathologist, that came later. That came as a result of deciding, okay, um, what does the plot need, basically.
Right, right. That makes sense. Yeah, and I have to also agree and shout out the fact that you took such a unique approach with these characters because it's like you said, you when there's a husband and wife kind of character duo, you typically expect, it's exactly like you said, like there's a certain trope associated with that in terms of like their relationship and how it works. And so with your characters, it really was a breath of fresh air, especially, as a horror fan because they were so in sync, like you said, right from the get-go. Like they have, like plans for like certain scenarios, like they know kind of everything about each other and they're very much in sync in that way, but there's also like this really interesting kind of power dynamic that I thought was interesting, especially with Jason's line of work. Right, and so yeah, it was just really really well developed, very nuanced characters, and yeah, definitely a breath of fresh air for the horror genre. So I one of my favorite parts about the book was kind of their dynamic.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad.
So yeah, and then another element of the book that I called out in my review, and I remember when you and I were discussing the podcast interview here, you mentioned this, but yeah, the book's editing and kind of the level of polish and the pacing. You mentioned that like you're a fan of kind of fast-paced kind of action type of television shows and stuff, and that makes a lot of sense because the book itself is just really really like just tight in terms of pacing. Like it's impressive. I could not put it down like from one chapter to the next. And of course, you mentioned to me in our conversation that you yourself edited the book. So I guess part one of my question here is, do you have any experience doing editing like this, or was this your first time editing a feature-length novel like this?
It was my first time, believe it or not.
Wow. Yeah.
I- yeah, I did actually consider hiring a professional editor, but I'm a first-time author, and the rates for editing services can be pretty high, for an average person. And I thought, I could save up and try at some point, but I thought, let me give it a shot first. Let me do my best and then see where it is at the end of it. And so I bought a book called Seven Drafts by Allison K. Williams, I believe.
Hmm.
And she basically goes through how to write and edit a book and have a finished, polished product in seven drafts. And I thought, okay, well, I'll give this a shot. And so actually, I found it very helpful in breaking down how to self-edit because, I mean, this is my first book. I'd never edited something like this before. I didn't even know where to begin. And so that was really helpful for me. And number two, I really am super grateful for my alpha readers and my beta readers because they were able to really help me make the devouring into like the polished product it is today.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I'll have to check out that book you mentioned too, because I don't consider myself a very strong self-editor when it comes to my work. It's one of those things where you're like, after seeing it so many times, I find myself becoming blind to it, right? Which it makes sense, alpha
Oh
beta,
yeah.
yeah, alpha readers and beta readers would catch things that you wouldn't. So yeah, that definitely makes sense from an editing standpoint. Now from a pacing standpoint, I'm curious. Are you, as a writer, are you more of like a plotter? Like, did you have this outlined like beat for beat when you went to write it? Or are you more of a pantser in the sense that you kind of like, just jumped in and started writing? Or was it a combination of the two?
So I'm a plotter. I definitely outline every scene and sort the scenes by chapter. And for this book specifically, after I wrote out all of the like scenes I wanted, I sorted them by chapter at the highest point of tension. So I would leave that as the end of the chapter and then move the rest of the scene to the next one, which I think worked out really well.
Hmm.
Um, And then also, it helped also to alternate POVs a lot. So you had, something happened to Jason. Suddenly, scene ends at the highest point of tension, but the next chapter is not Jason's continuation. It's Ayana, right? Doing something totally different. So I thought that also helped a lot with keeping the pace going and making the reader want to keep reading.
Okay, yeah, that's actually super good advice. I think you responded to my thread on Blue Sky, where I was asking kind of how multi POV authors sort of approach that, and it makes a lot of sense, like you said, like kind of build that tension and then leave them on a cliffhanger, switch the POV, and then they're obviously invested. They want to keep going and kind of get back to that. So that kind of push and pull with the tension of the story is really interesting. I like that a lot. So yeah, kind of looking forward, to what you've got coming down the pipeline here. I noticed on your website you have a future projects section with kind of like progress bars for each of your projects, which is really cool. I think I've seen that maybe a couple other times, but it's one of those things where I just think that's super cool in terms of transparency and kind of looping in readers as to what's coming down the pipeline. So yeah, you
Thank
have
you.
several different projects listed there. So my question for you is, what's kind of your next focus, and what's the rest of 2026 look like for you in terms of what now that your book is out? What's the next
Well,
thing?
well, so right now I do have four projects like kind of I'm juggling. The main project that I'm working on is called Crucible of the Broken Moon. It's the first book of a duology, and specifically it's a romantic space fantasy inspired by my love of Star Wars and Dune. So if you are big fans of Star Wars and Dune, by all means please follow along with my updates. But it's slow going. It's a rough first draft here compared to The Devouring, which I wrote in like 36 days or something like that. Um, this one is taking me months, and honestly, I would not be surprised if it took me the whole rest of the year to finish drafting. It's that challenging, that difficult of a draft. But yeah, it's supposed to be a duology. It's basically about this princess who runs away from home, her home planet, and arranges her own marriage to a warlord's son and mercenary so that they can overthrow her tyrannical father.
Hmm.
So that's for me, like that's sort of a more traditional like space fantasy, science fantasy story.
Mhm.
Um, and then I also actually drafted last month a vampire novella called The Heart is a Weapon. I wrote it as a like purely self-indulgent treat, something just for me. So I don't actually know if I'm going to publish it or not, or if I'm just
Hmm.
going to keep it for myself. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes we just need to write things for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, but it's basically about this young vampire who is like targeted by vampire hunters, and so she has to like eradicate them before they destroy her. So, pretty straightforward, like novella style plot. Um, my other ones are a little bit more nebulous. I have a werewolf horror romance that's kind of simmering in the back burner. Similar vein to Midsummer, like the movie, about like a city girl who moves to a sleepy small town in the middle of the woods and finds herself in like a horror movie, and there's also cannibalism.
Hmm.
So, and then like the like most like nebulous, like the vaguest idea that I have is this fantasy trilogy about a secret society of mages, and that's probably not going to happen for several years. So I wouldn't ask me about that at all.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair. I love the scope of everything you're doing though. Those projects sound amazing. Yeah,
Thank
and I
you.
was I was I was curious too. Like obviously you and I have talked a little bit about I think I had asked you a while back if you were considering, becoming more active on Substack or posting like, kind of shorter fiction or anything like that. Obviously your website has a blog too, so I'm curious like do you see a future where something like that novella, for example, could be published, as maybe like standalone chapters on your blog or, on a place like Substack? Or are you more focused on kind of, major sort of book releases as far as like your author trajectory goes?
I have considered making the novella available for free, either probably on my website, but I don't know yet. I haven't decided. Like I said, I made it for I wrote it for me, and so
Mhm.
it might remain for me. And then like a lot of my writing energy and publishing energy does go into like my bigger novels and series because I think I like to share things with other people too, especially the things that I create. So I want to like focus more of my energy in those projects that I do intend to share with others.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Now, as a fan of The Devouring, I'm curious. Like, obviously, no spoilers, but that book felt like pretty complete in terms of the story there. But I'm curious, like, do you ever see yourself returning to that world, with like, kind of a side story or a spiritual successor, or is that one kind of done and finished for you?
Actually, my husband gave me a really good idea to make a short story collection for it, like
Ooh,
exploring the Eldritch gods mythos in
hmm,
a collection of short stories. And if that goes well, which I think it will, I am considering a possible like sequel, quote unquote, but
hmm.
it would be more like post-apocalyptic kind of Bloodborne vibes, if you're
Ooh,
familiar with the
okay,
video game.
yeah, yeah.
So but I don't know yet, right? Like I don't want to say too much and decide later like, "Oh, I'll stick with just the short story collection or something like that, you know. It's just an idea.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that short story collection sounds phenomenal. I would be first in line to get a copy of
Thank
that.
you.
Because I was gonna say, like, The Devouring, it really did set up this very rich kind of eldritch horror universe. I could see it going in so many directions. So a short story collection makes a lot of sense. And then obviously, as someone, I myself have kind of a quote unquote horror mythos inspired by, Lovecraft and other cosmic horror writers. So I would love to see what you do in terms of expanding your universe. That sounds really, really good. Yeah. So, another thing we talked about too was The Devouring has been doing quite well since it came out. How's your experience been so far with marketing the book? Like, are you like, what's your strategy, for fellow indie authors? Because I know marketing is one of those things that, every time you bring it up, writers like go running in every direction,
Yeah. That's a great question. And I'm going to be honest, marketing is tough.
Yeah.
And I am actually predisposed to liking marketing. I like to talk with other people about my book. I like to talk
Mhm.
about myself. I like to get on podcast and have interviews. And I have a panel coming up later this summer at a writing convention.
Nice.
So there's I love to market and I think I have a like good head for it, but it is hard. It is a hustle, especially as an indie author. You have to look for your opportunities. You have to look for the author interviews, the reviewers. You have to make everything yourself, right? Like
Mm.
there's no publishing house that is going to make sell sheets for you to give to bookstores, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to manage all of your like accounts with Ingram Spark and Amazon if you're going to do that or whatever other online distribution that you're using. You have to submit your copyright submission form yourself if you're going to do that. You have to explore whether you're going to do an LLC or not, this or that, and it's a lot of decision making and a lot of hours going into marketing and admin that could go into writing and editing but don't, you know?
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, and that's a very realistic view of it because it is one of those things. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it's like it takes a lot of time. It's necessary, obviously, but that is time that could be spent writing and editing. So you have to like strike that balance. And it is a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah.
So now that your first book is out, I'm curious, is there anything that you would change or that you plan to change about your, like, when it comes time to kind of get ready to release your next book? Like, will you do anything specifically differently, or do you think you kind of like, obviously you've had some success with this first book, so I'm curious, like, is there anything that you'll change at all, or are you just going to kind of stick to a similar strategy when it comes time for your next book?
I think my strategy for the devouring worked really well.
Yeah.
If I do anything differently for the next book, it would be just to tighten up the timeline, leading up to release. I
Hmm.
don't know if I need 3 months maybe 2 months, or maybe I do need more time. I'd have to analyze how this one went. And also in terms of like getting the word out there, I started my Instagram account 3 months before releasing The Devouring, but now, I have plenty of time to build up for the next book on other social media. Um, Blue Sky was my main, hub for social media and marketing and talking about my book before Instagram, and my only one actually.
Mm.
So with a second avenue, maybe it'll do better. Maybe it won't. I don't know. We'll have to see.
Yeah. And of course, having multiple social media accounts, I can definitely sympathize with that. I try to be on several different ones. Obviously, Blue Sky is one of the first ones that I joined. But yeah, that's its own juggling act, trying to
Yes.
manage multiple
Yes,
social
for
media.
sure.
All right. Well, my last question here for you. This is something I ask every guest on the show. Now that you've kind of published your first novel here, I'm curious, what's one piece of advice, or if you have more than one piece of advice, that's fine too. But what's some advice that you would give to like your fellow indie authors who are, just starting out on their own creative journey? Maybe they're, working their way towards their first book, or there's someone possibly who's, hasn't written in a long time and now they're kind of getting back into it. What's some advice that you would give them, given your experience?
I think the most important piece of advice, because yeah, I could give a lot of advice right now, but the
Yeah.
most important is to find a community of other writers. I can't begin to tell you how impactful it was for me to get into the writing community on Blue Sky, meet people, and who eventually, helped out as my alpha and beta readers, who eventually became my friends. Their support and their just, being there to cheer me on and hype me up was so crucial. It doesn't matter if it's an in-person community or group, or on Discord or Substack, or any social media site. Find the people who can support you and who you can support in turn.
Yes. I could not agree more with that answer. And it's so funny that you say that, because I was on an author interview where I was being interviewed last week over on Substack, and someone asked me a similar question. And I said the same thing. I said, find community, because it really is like a game changer when you surround yourself with other writers and creatives. It's just they will pick you up when the going gets tough, and then you in turn can kind of pay it forward,
Yes.
and help out others as well. So I love that. It's a fantastic answer.
Yeah. I'd say without the people that I met, The Devouring would not be published. I would probably still be working on it, and it would not be like the level of quality it is today.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, yeah. It's so important. Yeah. So I have to wholeheartedly agree with your answer there. That's fantastic advice. Well, my friend, thank you again for taking the time to come on the show here. Obviously, I will include a link to purchase The Devouring in the show notes, as well as links to your socials and your website. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you back on the show here, maybe when your next book is gearing up for release. I'd love to hear more about that one when the time comes.
Well, thank you for inviting me again. It was great being here, great talking to you. And yeah, I would absolutely love to be back on the show to, promote my next book or talk about any other topics related to writing.
Sounds like a plan. All right. Well, thank you again, my friend. All right. And a huge thank you to A.M. Schilling again for coming on to the show. And now it's time for a look at next week on Substack and a quick update on my novel. So let's start with the novel. Yeah, this last week has been rough. I'm not gonna use that as an excuse. That being said, I haven't made as much progress as I would like. That being said, I have come up with some new ideas, and I've got something coming up that will, no matter what, create progress. So I'll share some of that again here. I mention this every couple of weeks, but every Wednesday over on Blue Sky, I participate in an event called Horror Writers Chat, and it's so good. There's always these great prompts where you answer questions, and you can kind of, restack, as we say on Substack, restack people's posts and stuff like that. It's really fun. If you're on Blue Sky, please check it out. It's really, really cool. But anyway, there was a question that came up in this last week's Horror Writers Chat about, I forget what it was, but my answer to it was essentially that I've discovered that I'm myself as a writer, I'm really good at short form fiction, but when it comes to my book, like this one that's been in production for roughly 10 years now, I just struggle to finish it for some reason. And so one of the horror writers who runs that chat, she responded and said, well, why don't you try participating in some of the daily kind of work in progress prompts that, pop up around Blue Sky. For example, there'll be ones where you get a word each day and it's like, does this word show up in your book? If it does, take a screenshot of the page and share it, kind of thing. And she was saying that participating in that will kind of get me excited about the idea again, and it'll get me interested to work on it. And I think that's a really, really good piece of advice. So I wanted to share it here as well. And then, this coming week on Thursday, I have my weekly writing group that I go to on Discord, and they have graciously agreed to look at my outline for me for this novel. As you may have heard already, this novel has 6 POVs, and so even though I'm a pantser at heart, I'm trying to plot this out, and I'm running into issues there. So I'm gonna update the outline no matter what by next Thursday, and the writing group is gonna give feedback on that, and I'm really hoping that'll kind of kickstart things for me. But yeah. I wish I had more to report. If Happy Nielsen's listening and she's mad at me, I understand. It's just been a long week. Oh man, I can fill a whole podcast full of that. So we're going to skip over that for now, but that's the novel update. Let's talk about next week on Substack. So tomorrow, this is coming out on Friday, so the Saturday after this podcast releases, we'll have our last power-up prompt before the May Challenge begins, May 1st. My good friend and poet Hazel Allen is writing this one, so stay tuned. It's a very interesting concept that they're working with, so stay tuned for that on Saturday. Tomorrow, also Saturday, later in the day, is going to be the release of my full post about May's Challenge, which is entitled The Halls of Pandemonium. You'll get a look at what it entails, what to expect, and you'll have a chance to vote on the prizes. Again, we can do what we did for Flash Fiction February. You can pick something different. Also, in the next week here, hoping to work on the next Order of the Pawn chapter for that Devine series. I know that one was supposed to be out last week due to struggles on my side. I had to delay that. I'm trying to get out by the end of the month, one more chapter. And then, of course, that will go on hold, just like it did in Flash Fiction February, so I can focus on the event. But yeah, one more chapter I think would be nice. So fingers crossed we'll get that out. And then beyond that, this coming week here, I'm going to try to stay as active as always on Substack. I'm going to be working behind the scenes on getting the May Challenge set up. Shout out to, a bunch of people. Mina Howell's been helping me with it. Verdant Butterfly's been helping me with it. Mary Ellen Brady's been helping me with it. J.M. Gooding has been integral to this challenge that's coming up, and you'll find out why soon. But yeah, his help has been just absolutely amazing. And of course, Leron Haywood has also returned after literally being the person that made Flash Fiction February work. I'm really happy to have them joining the team as well for May's Challenge. So yeah, got some great input. We have people submitting prompts. We have new art. There is new art from the Circus Dragon that'll be making its debut on Saturday. Yeah, great stuff. It's going to be great. I'm really excited for it. It's just, as always, a ton of work behind the scenes. But yeah, I'm going to get that ready this coming week. And then, as everyone knows, I work with Audio Mazes, so I have several projects in progress for them that I can't talk about just yet. But that's also part of my kind of planned deadlines for this week. I'm jumping back into a project you may have heard a long time ago called Celestial Feast, which is a tabletop role-playing game with an interesting eco kind of fantasy spin to the story and setting. Working on that this week as well. So yeah, lots going on. But hey, we're coming up on the end of the episode here. I just want to say thank you again to all of you, to the ones listening, to people who have been in this community forever. I have become way more comfortable than I ever thought I would with being honest and vulnerable, especially on the internet. And every time I do, share kind of the struggles and stuff that I'm having, you all just show up. You show up, you share your support. I have people DMing me to check in. I mean, it's beautiful. Honestly, it's beautiful. It's what social media should be. And despite Substack's problems as a platform, the people here continue to just blow me away with how nice and genuine and talented you all are. So just wanted to take a second to say thank you again. I really, really appreciate all of you. But hey, that's all I got for you this week. So let's get ready for that May Challenge starting soon. Stay tuned for that power-up prompt and article tomorrow. And as always, thank you again for listening. This is Bradley Ramsey, signing off.
Welcome to Earth. I hope these accommodations are to your liking.
The air here is strange, but I suppose I'll get used to it. It's good that you called me. This pandemonium business is getting out of control. Hey, Lord Devereaux, who is this?
Ah, yes. Allow me to introduce you to Viscount Valegrave. He is my third cousin, twice removed. Don't ask. It means something different where we come from. Suffice to say, we are related.
A pleasure, my friend. I have heard you are a purveyor of prompts and stories, is that right? I am. I hope you don't mind my asking, but what are you? Yes, my visage can be quite disturbing. Don't mind the teeth, I don't bite. Much. Alright, I guess we'll save the big reveal for tomorrow's post then. But hey, I'm looking forward to working with both of you on next month's challenge. Indeed, it will be a challenge to die for.
Ah, I see what you did there.
Yes, I do so love human humor.